Larry Wilson is a broadcasting legend. He started with a single struggling AM radio station in Honolulu, Hawaii, a handful of investors, and a bank willing to take a $600,000 risk on this first-time entrepreneur. Leveraging his keen business and programming sensibility and his stellar reputation for honesty and integrity, Larry built one of the largest and most respected broadcasting companies in the world. And in just 17 short years, he exited with a whopping $2.1 billion sale. How did he do it, and what steps do you need to take to build your own business? Hot off the presses, Larry has authored Do What's Right, an amazing tell-all book about his journey as a working-class kid in rural Arizona, taking that leap into entrepreneurship, becoming a broadcasting pioneer, and most importantly, he serves up the secrets you need to build your own business from the ground up. And he doesn't pull any punches. This is Crave News Money. Larry, it is great to have you with us. How are you?
I'm doing great. Just busy signing books.
I love it. We're going to talk about the book here in just a little bit. But, first let's talk about you've built two of the largest radio groups in the world, starting with Citadel, but you came from pretty humble beginnings. Where were you born and how were you raised? Then let's talk about your transition from accountant attorney into media mogul.
Well, I was born in a little town, a farming town in Arizona, middle of Arizona, Coolidge, Arizona. And my dad worked he worked at a lumber yard. He was an assistant manager at a lumber yard and during that time. And my mom, she stayed home. I went to school there, and then I went to Flagstaff. We moved to Flagstaff when I was starting high school, and lived there. And then I went to NAU, got my accounting degree, Price Waterhouse, to get my CPA certificate, which I did. And then I went to law school at the University of Arizona.
So you get your accounting degree, you get your law degree, you come out of school. Right out of the box, did you go to work for a big company, or how did you get started out of school?
I went to work for a company, a law firm, the biggest law firm in Phoenix at the time, and I think it still is probably. It's a great law firm, Snell and Wilmer, two great partners, Mark Wilmer and Mr. Snell. And so I started there and worked, I started doing mainly merger and acquisition work right out of the box. We had a big client that was a public company, New York Stock Exchange company, and the guy that had done all their work, which was kind of sidelined with an injury of his back, and they threw me right into the fire. I mean, first deal I didn't, they don't teach you how to write contracts. They teach you the law in law school, and so I had to fast track it and get up to speed on doing the agreements.
Larry, do you recall what your first deal was?
Yeah, my first deal was we bought. Our company was Combined Communications Corporation, and it was run by a guy named Carl Eller, who was my real mentor. I mean, I learned so much from Carl. But I went into the office one morning expecting to be second chair on a deal to a senior partner, Steve Craig, and he was hurt. His back was hurt. And I found myself shortly thereafter on Carl's Learjet going to Los Angeles to do a $21 million deal, which back then was significant.
What type of deal was it? Were you buying radio stations or newspapers, or what were you doing back then?
We're buying billboard company. We became the biggest billboard company in North America. And, we go through this one deal and 21 million, and then we followed it with a billboard deal in Toronto to buy all of 95% of the billboards in Canada. And Carl was just a voracious acquirer.
So you guys rolled up one of the biggest billboard companies in the world then. So you were there from kind of middle of their corporate journey all the way through rolling them up big, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, Carl was on his way when I went there. I did work for him for about 2 years on behalf of the law firm, and then he offered me the general counsel job, and I just went across the street and became his general counsel.
Got it. So you're general counsel there for how long? And then I want to talk about what motivated you to start your own company, which became one of the most well-respected companies in the world as far as communications goes. But what was your jumping off point? In other words, how long did you stay as general counsel, and what motivated you to start your own company?
Well, in 1980, roughly, the late 79, we sold Combined Communications to Gannett, the big newspaper company, and they offered me a job, but as their general counsel, but I'd have to live in Rochester, New York, and that didn't appeal to me. I'm a guy from the West. I love the West, and I want to stay in the West. So I just did, right then, I just killed some time. I had some buddies that were practicing law. They'd spun off from Snell and Wilmer and started their own firm, and they brought me in as a partner. And I spent 2 years there just basically playing golf. I was just all they wanted me to do is bring in clients, and they staffed me with several really sharp young lawyers. And I also bought a radio station in Honolulu simultaneously with leaving after the Gannett deal. And Honolulu was a major chore. I had that's one of the things in the book we talk about, because it was just one disaster after another. I mean, the DC-10 crashed in Chicago, and they grounded the 10s. There was nobody coming to Oahu.
Do you recall what it was that motivated you to buy that radio station, or how did that opportunity come to you?
Well, a longtime friend and business associate, a guy named Frank Khalil. He's one of the major brokers in the media business, and he called me and said, I've got a deal that you can't go wrong on. And he was so wrong, but we made it out of it alive. But I bought an AM station because I didn't have much money, so I had to buy it, and I bought a standalone AM, which I'd never do again. Copley Press in San Diego, Helen Copley. They had put the thing on the air in like 1939. They had never made a profit with it. And the second month I made a profit, and I was sailing along pretty good until the DC-10 crashed. And then following that was United Airlines went on strike, and they were the major carrier to Honolulu. So I was back to back, and my advertisers were dragging their payments, and I was feeding this thing money so fast that I thought I was going to run out.
Did you recall, by the way, we're going to get to how you exit a lot of this stuff later, because you did have a $2.1 billion exit, but what did you pay for that first radio station in Honolulu?
I paid $600,000, and I raised the money from three of my good friends in Phoenix, and borrowed half of it from the bank, the bank was run by a real close friend of mine. So that's how we financed it, and the 600 was, it was a low price, but there were no buyers for that kind of station at that time. And after we signed the deal and I wired the money, Helen says, "Can I ask you something?" She was about, I don't know, she was probably 80 years old, and I don't know what I was, 40 maybe. And she says, "Why in the world would you buy this radio station?" That was a real confidence builder, I'm going to tell you right now. And I said, "Well, I think I can make it work."
Well, it's amazing that she actually, at least she waited till after the wire hit until she asked the question.
Yeah.
So was that, Larry, was that the beginning of Citadel? Was that actually Citadel's first radio station, or was that kind of a one-off?
That was a one-off, and I operated it for 3 years. Back then there was a 3-year rule. You had to hold them for 3 years, and I wanted out at the third year deadline, because I just wanted out of there. It's a very difficult place to do business.
Mm-hmm.
It's really not. It's not like, it's almost like a foreign country. As I found out. It's tough.
So you exited after 3 years. How did Citadel come about? Because look, I've been a fan of yours for many, many years. Followed you. Love getting to say hi at the broadcasters conventions and things like that. You're one of the few guys in this business who is absolutely respected through and through. How did you start Citadel that became this iconic company?
I was working with a fellow named John Bayless, and John was my best friend, and he had run the radio division at Combined, and so we were trying to buy a station in Chicago from CBS, and basically had an agreement in principle, almost worked out, and John got killed in a car accident, and I took a leave of absence from the law firm and went over to California and stayed there 3 or 4 months while his wife recuperated, and I oversaw the radio stations that he had in Santa Maria, California. And during that time, I called a friend of mine who was in Tucson, I believe, at the time, and Burts Bees, and I said, "Why don't you come over here and help me with this thing?" Because it was a pile of junk, really. And
was it just a single station in Los Angeles?
No, it was in Santa Maria, and it was a couple of stations, an AM and an FM, and the FM wasn't getting much traction. The AM was a throwaway. It was over, it's over by the glove compartment in the car, and that's when you're over by the glove compartment, that's usually a bad signal.
Yep, up in the 1500s, not a good thing.
No, not really. Not many 1500s are any good.
Interesting. So you start with those in Santa Maria. Was that did those eventually become Citadel properties, or did you just go out there and clean them up?
No, Alice got on her feet again after the accident. They were both in the accident, and she took it over and started running it, and ran it for several years before she sold it. And but during this time, I talked to Fritz, and I said, "Let's get in the business. Let's get started in something." And so I called this friend, same guy who put me into Honolulu, Frank Khalil, and he's really a good friend and a really good guy, honest as can be. And I said, "Hey, Fritz and I want to start a radio company." We'd sold to Gannett, and I had the rights to, I had taken them. Gannett didn't want the rights to the name, Combined Communications Corporation. We had a very cool logo. It was 3 C's, kind of looked like a radio signal. And so I knew I wanted to be CCC, but I didn't want to be Combined Communications because that was Carl's deal. So we looked in the dictionary and found the word Citadel. And that's how it became Citadel Broadcasting. And we, Citadel Communications Corporation, and we had the logo. And Citadel, that was really our slogan, was the fortress that commands the city. It's one of the definitions of Citadel. And most people thought I went to the Citadel College, but I didn't. But I loved the word. It stood for what we stood for. We were going to go in. We were going to take big market radio practices and take them into middle America. And that's exactly what we did. We stayed the course at Citadel. No big markets. We had Providence, Rhode Island, no New York, no Los Angeles. And Fritz was really good. He was really good. We ran into some problems with our bank, and I ended up buying Fritz out because he was burned out. He just had it.
Let's go back to the beginning. So you formed it with partners. How did you raise the money, and how did you locate those first stations that you ended up buying? And then let's talk about how you grew it out. But how did it start?
Well, I called Frank Khalil and I said, "Find us a really good market. I'd really like to be in Tucson if it's possible." He said, "I think it's possible." We formed a corporation. We didn't have any money, but we formed a corporation, and I put together an offer for some properties from the Nichols family. John Nichols and Oklahoma City owned them. AM and FM, easy listening, which is, it's gone by the wayside now. I don't know of any easy listening stations in the country. They called it elevator music.
Yep, and that was the thing at the time, music of your life and formats like that.
And this thing was declining. It was sort of the end of the life for easy listening. So once I got the deal made, it was for $5.5 million. And I raised $3 million from friends. Actually, I raised $1.5 million in cash, and then they gave me a note for $1.5 million that I could borrow against at the bank, and then borrow against the assets. So we put the deal together. It was mostly Phoenix Suns basketball players. I was in the Phoenix Thunderbirds, which, I still am. I'm a member, but I'm not active. But I was in the Thunderbirds and had a lot of friends in there. And Tom and Dick Van Arsdale were two of the primary guys. And Dick said, we'll go in. Tom and I'll go in if you'll let Joe Protsky come in. I started, he's a trainer for the basketball team. And I said, what does he know about business? And he said, well, he's a good guy, and we want him, everywhere we go, we get him to invest with us, and he's got a lot of money. So, okay. So we did that, and we had a great group of shareholders. I mean, they never meddled in the business. We had regular board meetings, and they'd ask questions, but they always respected the chain of command.
And these are your first two shareholders. I mean, these are your first two radio stations, and they were in Tucson.
Correct.
So what made you decide to start down the acquisition trail, or was that something that you thought about from early on? And then what were your next couple of acquisitions?
Well, that's a good question. I thought about it early on. I'd been with Carl so long that I thought I was bulletproof. I watched him make some decisions, which I would fight with Carl. I mean, he would say, what do you think about this deal? I said, we can't do it. We can't do it. He said, we're going to do it. And he'd say, if you understand your orders, get it done. And I'd go get it done. And he just amazed me at his instinct from his gut. And it rubbed off on me a little bit, I think. And so when I formed this, I told Fritz, you gotta go down there and run it. And he did. And he did a great job. And as soon as he got it running, we hired another fellow, Dick Stein, good radio guy, still a radio guy, I believe. And Dick ran it, and then I hit the acquisition trail, and I bought stations in Bozeman, Montana, real nice Barrow stations in Bozeman. I bought Colorado Springs, an FM in Colorado Springs, and I bought an AM FM in Salt Lake City, which at the time I think everybody thought I was crazy because it's a tough market. I mean, it's so over radioed. I think it still is, but we found our niche in there. We changed the station to country, and it's still the number one country station, I believe. And we had some great programmers in our company. That was really why I was so successful. It wasn't me, it was the people.
Well, Larry, but the secret to success I've found in a lot of these companies like yours that have rolled up and become really successful is your acquisition criteria. So when you were going out looking, were there certain criteria you were looking for in radio stations or groups? I mean, this is back when you could only own 2 stations in a market when you first started this up. What type of criteria were you looking for? What made something attractive to you? What made it not attractive to you?
Well, I was looking for really good signals. Back then, I think it was something like 60% of the radio stations in America were losing money. And so I was a turnaround guy. I wanted to buy them cheap because they were in the tank and change the format, change the people, and build a brand. And we just did that over and over and over. And then we bought Colorado Springs. I thought I'd hit a home run, and because they were going to build Star Wars. President Reagan was going to put Star Wars backbone in Colorado Springs. They were going to spend several $billion. And lo and behold, right as I finished the deal, he pulled that out. Not going to do it, and people were leaving in U-Hauls. I mean, it was bleak, but we changed the format, and we became the #1 rock station, classic rock station in Colorado Springs, and we did fairly well.
So Larry, you started in 1984 with Citadel, 2 stations in Tucson. You grew it to, how many stations was it? 200 and almost 300 stations, wasn't it?
That's a tough one. I don't remember. 170 some maybe.
Yeah. So at what point did you know?
The law changed, and we could provide more than 2 stations in a market.
Right. Yeah. When 1996 came along, that opened up a lot of doors for a lot of us radio guys. That was a blessing. Blessing I didn't see coming, but glad it did.
One thing we did, if I could add this, we were struggling in Colorado Springs, even though we were well rated. I needed more firepower, so I did some research, and I found a case at the Federal Communications Commission where they had let a failing radio station in Miami, Florida, team up with another Spanish-speaking station so they could survive. And so I asked my lawyer, could we do this? And they were calling them time brokerage agreements back then. And he said, well, let me go ask Roy Stewart at the head of the transfer branch. And lo and behold, he called me back and said, Roy has no problem with it. As long as you can even program it yourself, as long as you give them the right to veto what you're doing.
Wow.
And so we did the first, we call it time brokerage agreement. I wrote the first one with the help of a lawyer in Washington, Peter O'Connell. And I wrote the first agreement. We got it approved by the FCC. We didn't try to sneak one through. I think there was a fellow named Steve Hicks that I think he did the first one, but he didn't get it approved. He did it on the sly. And I just didn't, I've never wanted to do stuff like that. And so we got it approved, and we had about 4 months before the written opinion came out. And we started doing these everywhere, and nobody really picked up on it until the ruling came out. And from then on, that was the start of deregulation, and it opened the door for the 96 bill, I believe. That's what everybody said.
You know, Larry, I didn't even realize that. I had no idea that you guys doing a TBA would be the thing that kicked that thing off. So you get rolling, you start picking up different markets, you're getting in these TBAs and stuff. The law changes in 1996. At what point did you know you guys had something huge, and when did you decide to take it public?
Well, I think, let me get my dates straight. I think the first thing we did was in about 1994, maybe in 1996. We were buying some stations in the Northeast, great radio stations, Providence, Rhode Island, and so forth, and at Pennsylvania stations, and it was a $120 million deal, and I had about $20 million of cash on hand. So we did a bond deal, an overnight bond deal, which they used to do back then, and it just amazed me. I'd get on a call with Alex Brown, the old firm a long time ago, but I got a call with Alex Brown, and back then the analysts could talk to the companies, and so the analyst says, if you'll let us lead your bond deal, I will start coverage on your company.
Wow.
And he was the premier analyst in radio at the time. So I said, yeah, it's fine. It said, how do we get that done? He said, well, we'll have it done by tomorrow morning. I said, okay. They backstopped it, and then they sold it and to their customers. And that was really the first thing that made me public, even though I didn't have public shareholders. We finally, I think it's 99. We went truly public. We had a stock offering, and it was CS First Boston handled it, Credit Suisse, and they did a wonderful job, and we were oversubscribed and way above the price target that they had set for us, and it was really we were well on our way at that point, because we were doing so many acquisitions that it was just eating capital, and I just had to keep going to the well, and fortunately people liked us, and they kept stepping up. Putnam was one of our big investors. Putnam was our biggest investor, actually.
So you rolled this company, you rolled a lot of stations up between 1984 and 2001 when you sold it. Along the way, were there some pretty hard bumps that you recall, or was it pretty smooth sailing?
No, it was not smooth sailing. It's what happened is Security Pacific, back in that day, in the beginning, it was customary in Phoenix, Arizona, to have a relationship with a banker, and Bob Matthews was the head of Arizona Bank, and I went to Bob Matthews and Bob Goldwater, Barry's nephew. Bob Goldwater was working for Bob Matthews, and they believed in me and they loaned me the money, and but you didn't do a loan agreement. You had a promissory note, a 1-year promissory note, and it's a hell of a way to do business. But when the 1 year's up, Arizona Bank got sold to Security Pacific from California. I call them the Beach Boys. They were out of place in the desert, and they were ridiculous. I mean, they called my loan. I've been dealing with Bob Goldwater up on the 34th floor, where they have Charlie Russell paintings and Rembrandts, and they moved me down to the 12th floor, which was furniture like you had in your grade school. It was bad news. Hard chairs. It's like being in solitary confinement almost.
Well, how do you, when you're in the middle of something like this, you're rolling a company up rapidly, and they call your debt on you? I mean, how do you handle that, especially when it's not necessarily the people you know well?
Yeah, I didn't know him. The guy they assigned to it was his name. I really don't remember his name because we didn't call him by his name.
Any hints on what you called him?
He looked like Ichabod Crane, and I called him Pencil Neck, and it was only about a week before I had the nerve to call him that to his face, and so and I moved out of Phoenix after the 1989 Phoenix Open. I moved out of Phoenix. I'd ran the Phoenix Open in 1989, and I really wanted to get to Montana because I had a house in Montana, and I liked it in Montana, and Phoenix was sort of getting overgrown, and I also moved to Montana to get away from Pencil Neck, and he was totally intimidated by me. I am not proud of the way I acted, but sometimes when you have no choice, you have to play hardball, and boy, we played hardball with them, and a bunch of our guys had loans from them. When we made the compromise settlement, I got a banker in Phoenix, not a banker, but an investment company, Finova, came to my rescue and loaned me money, and a guy named Mark Levitt at not sure where he was then, but he was in New York. He's an investment banker, and he put together a group of investors to buy my first investors out. And of course, they were very happy. They made, probably 5 or 6 times their money in a 3 or 4 year period. And so everybody was happy, and I had a good bunch of investors. I mean, these guys, they really let me run the business. And when we did that refinancing and had all that bank trouble, that's when Fritz decided he wanted out, and I did an acquisition so I'd have enough critical mass to borrow from Finova, and Finova helped me, structure the whole deal, and Mark Levitt raised the money.
So Larry, you built this company. You started in 1984. You sold it in 2001. What led up to the sale, and how did you decide that it was a good time to sell? And how do you let go of a baby like that you've grown from nothing?
The way it happened is kind of ironic. I was honored at a roast in New York City. It was called the Bayless Roast. It was named in memory of John Bayless, and I was the guy that was getting roasted that year. Back then it was the biggest event for radio people.
I was there. I was there that night. I recall it.
Oh, really? Well, these guys tore me apart, but I was getting ready to do my rebuttal, and Bill Stakelin, who was the MC, really surprised me. I had no idea, but my lovely wife came up, and she gave the most glowing tribute to me. And I didn't even need to rebuttal after that. I didn't need to defend myself because she was so great at it. And so when we were getting ready for that, I called this friend of mine, Kristen Allen, who is the managing director over Credit Suisse, and said, she said, I know you're in town. I guess she called me and said, you're in town. Can I meet with you and have a drink? And so she met us over at the Pierre Hotel where we were holding the event, where we're staying. And my two boys were there and my wife. And she comes in there, and then she says, can I invite my friend Sandra over? Now, I didn't know Sandra, but I knew that she and this girl named Sandra had started out together at Morgan Stanley. And I said, sure, I'd like to meet her. So she came over, and she was introduced. She's a partner at Forsman Little in New York. And during this process, it suddenly dawned on me that Ted Forsman was the guy that tried to do the takeover of R.J. Reynolds. He was battling another big firm in New York, and he didn't get it.
Yeah, I think he and KKR went after it. Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, one of my highlights of my life was getting to meet Jerry Kohlberg. Mm-hmm. He was no longer at the firm, but I got to meet him and was trying to pitch him on giving me some money, but he didn't do it. But he's a really good guy and just a deal maker extraordinaire. So it really hit me that Sandra's with Forsman Little, and I on the way to the airport, I called Kristen. I said, who was Sandra? She said, she's the partner at Forsman Little. I said, oh, okay. And I said, tell me about that firm. And she told me a little about it and about Ted Forsman. And I said, and so on my plane, got to my plane and was talking to my wife on the way back out to Montana. I think we were in Montana then. And I said, maybe they're interested in buying us. Because I felt, it was right in there that that business started getting tougher. I mean, we missed our numbers, and that was the toughest thing I had to do. I had to go through this roast, and then 3 days later, have a conference call with investors saying I'd missed the Wall Street estimate, and nobody, the market just killed me. I mean, the market. Well,
you were right on the heels of the internet bubble burst, and it was a tough time for a lot of folks.
Yeah, it really was.
When you're doing a dance like that with Forsman Little, who brings up, would you like to sell, or, hey, I'm interested in selling? Who brings that one up?
Kristen called me a week or so later and said, could we come out to see you? And I said, sure, we'd be happy to. And she said, we're interested in taking a look at, we've been trying to get in the radio business but haven't been successful, and we're interested in taking a look at your company. And she said, I know a little about it from Kristen Allen, my friend, but I'd rather come out and bring our team, and we'll see if we can make a deal. And so we met at the we met in secret at the Venetian Hotel, because my headquarters was in Las Vegas, and a lot of people knew me, and so we went in the freight elevator up to the room with it's set aside, because I didn't want any rumors to get out, because you just can't have that in a deal. And so she comes in and she's brought, I don't know, maybe 6 people with her. I was like, whoa. It was just me and Donna Hefner. I said, well, I think we're outgunned here. And so we danced around for a while, and she asked a lot of questions. They all asked a lot of questions. And I just never forget this. This one girl, an Asian girl, sitting at her computer, never looked up, just typed everything that happened. And she was amazing. Once they bought us, she would say, now, back on June 27th, which is 3 months ago, you said this, and it didn't happen. I said, well, sometimes it doesn't happen when you think it's going to happen, but it will happen.
So from that meeting where you started everything by everybody's in the freight elevator going up to the secret meeting spot, is that the meeting that the deal was done?
No. She said, we'll get back to you in a few days. And they went home and did their work, put their stuff together, wrote whatever memos they want to write internally. And then right before Christmas, she called me and said, Ted Forsman wants to meet you. I said, ooh, great. And I had read everything about Ted Forsman, and I mean, he was extraordinary. And I grew to love the man. He was just the straightest shooter. So he came out, and I met him at the Bellagio, private check-in. He's a high roller, private check-in area. And then we went to that little wine bar in the Bellagio, and we had a glass of wine, which we got to talking so much, neither one of us really drank the wine. And I really liked him, and we knew a lot of people in common. He knew Tom Brokaw. I knew Tom Brokaw. Just a lot of people in New York. And so I thought, well, I hope he does something. So after a few days from then, or what he said is, what he said at the end of the meeting, he says, well, I want to take a harder look at this. And we've done a lot of work so far, but we're going to do a lot more. And he said, could we come out on the 6th of January and bring our team, and we'll see. And we ended up, well, if we like what we see, we'll make you an offer. And that's what happened. And Ted surprised me because he showed up at the meeting in Las Vegas, and he never said a word during the meeting until at the very end. He says, Larry, can I use your office? I said, yeah, it's down at the end of the hall, corner office. And he goes down there, and Sandra trails right behind me. She was his gopher. And I guess that's not a good word to use, but that's what she did. She mopped up everything. And so soon she came back in the room. She said, Larry, Ted would like to talk to you. And so I said, okay. So I go down there, and he says, we'd like to meet you, take you to dinner, Sandra and I. And I said, great. Where do you want to go? He said, Bellagio. We'll go to the, I forget, it's a big steakhouse at the Bellagio. And, we got down there. I took my car. They had their limousine. And I got down there, and I met Ted, and kind of got there at the same time and walked in together. And I was just shocked because everybody that he passed, hello, Mr. Forsman. Hello, Mr. Forsman. And,
wow.
Turns out he turned out he's quite a gambler. He loved to gamble, and he paid his way through law school in bridge games, gambling in bridge games. I mean,
really, is that true?
It's true.
Wow,
yeah, it's true, and he's really, really smart. And so he. We during the dinner, they came over. This was so far out of my league, it was unbelievable. But the maitre d' came over, the sommelier, said, "Mr. Forsman, did you like some of the wine out of your private cellar?" He said, "Sure, yeah, bring us." I knew what he ordered. I can't remember right now, but I knew the wine was very expensive because I was a collector of that kind of wine, and I knew that vintage in 1984 was very expensive. So think, boy, he's got his own cellar here and he lives in New York. I mean, there's something peculiar. So we finished up then at the end of the dinner, he excused himself and he said, I'll be right back. And he's gone for quite a while. And I had a very uncomfortable time because I did not like Sandra very well. I mean, she wasn't a warm person. And whereas Ted, immediately I felt right at home with him. And that's really strange because he was the famous one and she wasn't. But I didn't like her. But we chit-chatted and he came back in and he threw some $100 bills over to me. I said, what's this? He says, well, I made a little money at the table. I just went out to the restroom and I had to stop at the table. I made a little money and I want you to have it. And I go, okay. So I drag it over and stick it in my coat pocket. And when I got out of there, it was about, I forget now, it's about $2,500. He just threw it to me. And so I'll never forget, I went to when I got out of that meeting with him, I went to down the street to the Four Seasons Hotel. And at that point, I hate to say this, but at that point I really needed a drink because I was a little stressed out because I just talked to the guy that had tried to buy RJ Reynolds and he's very interested. And so that's what we did. And, he said, I'm going home and I'll call you before the end of the week. If we're going to move forward, I'd like you to come come get together with me. And I said, where do you want to meet? He said, well, it'd be easiest for me if you'd come to me. And I said, well, I got, no problem. My plane's sitting right here at Karen. So we get a call on Thursday from Sandra saying, Ted would like to meet you, like to have you come to his house tomorrow morning at 9:00. So I flew to LA and got to his house. It was up on above Beverly Hills on, I forget the name of it, very, very fancy area, private gated entrances. And so we got in there and I thought he had been dating this, I knew he'd been dating this lady, Elizabeth Hurley, an actress.
The actress, right.
Yeah, I didn't really know who she was. So I ring the doorbell and this lady in this beautiful red gown, satin gown, down to her ankles, opens the door. And I thought it was Elizabeth Hurley. And so we chit-chatted. She said, Mr. Forsman will be down in a moment. And he came down the stairs looking dapper as he always did. And we went into his dining room. And he closed the door. And we started talking. And as we were trading stories, and he had known, he knew I'd worked with Carl Lindner and Carl Eller. Carl Lindner's a big financier from Cincinnati that had been our biggest investor in Combined Communications. And, we talked about Brokaw and several other people. And he finally said, you want some breakfast? I said, sure. So he pushed the button, just like in the movies. He pushed the button under the table. And the side door opens. And here comes Elizabeth Hurley. Except it's not Elizabeth Hurley. It's a lady that takes care of his house and cooks for him. And it was just a fantastic day, and so we started dabbling back and forth, and he said, let's go out to the sitting room. And we had a big fire built. It was a rainy day. And we're sitting there on a couch and we're chit-chatting. He says, I think I can probably go to $18 a share. And we were...
Where were you trading at the time?
Well, we were trading. I left out an important part. When we missed our numbers, we went from about $35 a share down to $8. Wow. $8. Just like a falling off a cliff deal. I sat and watched them pummel me. Just the you can watch the trades.
Do you recall what your market cap was at the height, and then after you missed the numbers and it went down to $8 a share?
I don't. I don't remember exactly. But when it went down to 8, I called my lawyer and I said, as soon as I can, because we didn't have a deal with Forsman Little at that point, and I didn't expect we were going to have one. So as soon as it went down to 8, I called my lawyer and said, you just give me the clearance when I can, and I'm going to go in and buy. And I went in the market and bought. I think I spent $2 or $3 million in 2 days buying stock, and I averaged about $7 per share. And so he's offering, we'd creeped on back up to 15, maybe 14. And he said, I think I can maybe swing it at 18. And I said, that's a non-starter for me. I mean, I'll take it to the board. I have to take it to the board, but it's a non-starter. And so he pulls out this piece of paper, and it's this Excel spreadsheet. And it took it from 18 to $26 a share. I saw it. And I said, can I have that paper? He said, no, my lawyer said I couldn't give it to you. I said, okay, well, I'd already taken a picture in my brain of it. And I knew that his break point was probably $26 a share. And that happened to be the number I wanted, because at that point, it would exceed $2 billion. And I'd never done anything that big. And I just had to get over that $2 billion number. And long story short, that's where we came at. And, after my meeting with Forsman, I said, I'll take this to the board. And then he called me, and on the way to the airport, he called me and upped it to $20. And I said, well, still, I'm not going to recommend it. So I got to the plane, and I had a call from Merrill Lynch, a guy at Merrill Lynch, a senior guy, a friend of mine. They said he's urgent that he talk to me, and I checking my stock. It was running up a little, and so I call him, and I've just left Ted's house, and he says, hey, there's 2 of my guys were on the train last night to Greenwich or someplace, and these 2 guys were on the train with a book, and it said acquisition of Citadel by Forsman Little.
Wow.
I go, oh my God. It was 2 bankers. And I think I'm at Citigroup. And I said, I was startled, but I said, who's Forsman Little? Never heard of him. And I just come from Ted's house. And he tells me they're the biggest buyout firm, they and KKR. They're the biggest there is. I said, well, I don't know anything about it, but nobody's talked to me about it. So I called Ted from the airplane and told him, and he says, we've got to get this done before the market opens on Tuesday. I said, why is that? He said, your stock's running up, and we can't, if it runs up too far, we can't do the deal. I said, well, I understand that, but there's no way we can do this deal by Tuesday. And he said, we've got to. And I said, well, why Tuesday? He said, well, Monday's Martin Luther King Day. And
so you had a holiday weekend.
Holiday weekend. The market was closed, so we had an extra day. So long story short, he called me an idiot. Well, it was quite a bit worse than that. It was a swear word. And when I turned down $24, he said, "You're an idiot," and he was really mad. You could just tell he was seething. And I started laughing, and he said, "What's so funny?" I said, "A lot of my friends say that about me." And he broke up laughing, and he said, "Let me call you right back." And then he calls me right back. 5 minutes. He said, "I'll go to 26, but it's over at $26 a share." And I said, "Well, I'll recommend $26 to my board, and the rest is history." We got our lawyer, Brian Rosenberger from Pittsburgh. I'd already sent my plane to Pittsburgh to bring him out, and it was amazing that these guys. Forsman's side. They told me in the disclosure document they spent $42 million on lawyers to do the deal, lawyers and accountants. Wow. And I probably spent $4 million, but Brian did it all himself. And he had some people back in Pittsburgh drafting for him, but he was right out in the front lines in our offices. And they had a team that went to went to Washington, D.C. to go through the FCC records. And my lawyers worked over the weekend, bringing them up to speed on our licenses. And lo and behold, at 2:00 in the morning, we were all there at the Bellagio for dinner at the Prime, and all my board. We had about 20-some people there, all the people that were working on the deal, and had a wonderful dinner. And then about 2 a.m., 1:30, Rosenberger came in, and he had a contract. He said, you need to have a board meeting. And so we had a board meeting by the elevator that came out in the kitchen. And of course, I said, here's the deal. And Brian explained the deal. And I said, I'm recommending that we take it. And it was a done deal. Our guys are like, whoa, because I don't think anybody had ever fathomed that this would end up like that.
Wow, what a thing. 17 years it took you to build $2.1 billion, a company that big. I mean, that's absolutely amazing. And you did it flawlessly. It was really amazing watching you build that company, because I'd gotten in the radio space back in '93, and watching guys like you and Lowry May is just unbelievable experience. So
Lowry Mace is a great man.
Yep.
We were fierce competitors, but we really had a great relationship. I mean, I respected Lowry more than anybody in the business.
You two were absolute pioneers in really making the radio business, what it was back in the heyday, back in the golden years. So you sell for 2.1. Did you stay on with the company for a while, or what did you do? And then let's talk about Alpha. But then I want to get into your book. That's most important here, is get into your book.
I stayed, and I invested about $11 million, $11 or $12 million in the new company. He gave us a chance to buy in, and I definitely wanted to buy in because I was going to run this thing. I figured I could double the size in a couple of years with Ted buying me, because Ted was a magic guy. I mean, the banks loved him. They'd give him any amount of money he wanted. And I think it was a Thursday, and Ted had us out to dinner to Le Cirque that night, and some of his troops were with him, and Donna went with me, and Ted brought this. Every woman he ever dated, he dated Princess Diana and Princess Diane, and he dated Elizabeth Hurley, Pajma, I don't know what her name is, but another beautiful lady. And so he held a celebration for us, and we were sitting in the hotel room in my suite at the Lowell Hotel up on 63rd, and the phone rang. It was my lawyer saying the money has hit my account. And,
wow!
It was like the most overpowering thing that ever happened in my life.
That
to the book.
Really, really amazing. So you sell. You decide to stay. You're going to grow the company. What happens?
Well, my wife had brain cancer, and in we closed in June of 01, and in December of 01, she had her 5th brain surgery, and it was very bad. She was a complete invalid, and so I had to quit. I called Ted and said, I'd like to meet you outside of your office, because I didn't want to meet with Sandra. And so he said, we'll go to the Four Seasons, was his watering hole. And so we went to the Four Seasons, and we sit down, and first thing that happens is we couldn't start talking because senators and congressmen kept coming over to the table to talk to Ted. And he's introducing me I met Donald Trump through Ted. I met, one night when we went to the dinner, Henry Kissinger came over to the table.
Wow.
And it was just, I was just like, I told Donna on the way back, we walked back to the hotel, I said, I'm out of my league here. This is beyond me. It's so, then, I said, he said, well, what do you want? And I said, well, I'd like to get my money back that I just put in. And he said, don't you want to stay in the investment? I said, no, because my fear was that he was going to hire Fareed Suleiman. And I thought that would be a disaster. I knew Fareed for a long time, and he's just a bean counter and devoid of any kindness to anybody. And so I said, I'd like my money back. He said, that's okay. I understand. And I said, I'd like to buy my airplane cheap. And he said, okay. So we worked out the terms. I had to work it out with Sandra, but they were very fair. And I bought my Falcon jet back and got my money out. And then he said, will you stay on until I get a replacement? I said, absolutely. So I stayed on running it from Montana out of my ranch, on the telephone every day with people, orchestrating this, doing that. And then he called me in April. He said, could you meet me at the Bellagio tonight? And I said, sure. So I get going and I fly down to Vegas and I go to the Bellagio, and as I walk in the front door, I saw Fareed Suleiman at the check-in desk. And I go, oh my God. So it's my worst nightmare. And I went and met, Ted always checked in a private place. It's a place that they have at the Bellagio for high rollers. Mm-hmm. And so I meet him in there, and he says, well, I want to tell you what we're doing. I said, I know what you're doing. He said, how do you know? I said, I saw Fareed at the counter. And he says, oh boy. And so we sat down, and he said, would you stay on as chairman? I says, no, I really can't. I just got to get out of here. I got to take care of my wife. And he said, well, I understand. And so, they agreed to all the things, let me unwind. And thank God they did, because Fareed tanked the thing. He went and bought ABC radio for way too much money. Yeah,
one of the worst deals in the history of radio.
Yeah, and it was a downfall. I mean, it took him down so bad. And, Fareed was, I think I'd been taking $1 million salary, or $1.2 million maybe. But I see these salaries that these people are getting. It's crazy. See the salaries that baseball players and football players are getting. It's nuts. And so he hires Fareed for like $4 million a year. Oof. And I'm like, oh boy, here we go. And then Fareed voted bonuses. And Ted was, he got really enamored with. He bought McCormick, the big sport agents, agency, and he went to run that, and he loved that. He loved meeting famous people, and he kind of must not have paid attention to Citadel, because Fareed just took a wrecking ball to it and just destroyed it. And it's just not right. It's he's living in Florida now, and some young new wife, and
kind of doing his thing. So you move on. You take a little hiatus for a while. Do you just kind of manage your investments until till Alpha came along, or what did you do between Citadel and Alpha?
Oh, I went crazy. My wife we converted our movie theater at our ranch into her bedroom because she could not go upstairs, and I didn't have an elevator and really couldn't put one in. So we made her bedroom in there. I hired a 24-hour crew of a nurse and a nurse practitioner. A friend of mine at the hospital helped me arrange it, and they lived in our guest house. We put TV cameras in the movie room, and I'm a big dog lover. I had 3 dogs at the time, and every night those people would come in to check on her at 3 o'clock in the morning. My dogs would go crazy. I wasn't getting sleep. I didn't have anything to do. I had professional managers managing my money. I didn't really care too much about that. It was miserable. It was a miserable time in my life. And watching my wife suffer the way she did, it really got to me. And by the time she passed away in 2008, I was a wreck, a total wreck. And then I got a call, and somebody said, one of my old investors said, would you come back again? And I said, well, I've been looking at it, and maybe. And so I got an opportunity. A broker from Dallas called me and said, there's Paul Allen has 2 stations for sale in Portland. I happened to be in Portland at the time for eye surgery. I had a transplant in my corneal transplant in my eye, and I was in there recovering from that when I got the message at night after the surgery. And so I called the broker and I said, what do you think he's going to take? And he said, well, it's going to take probably $20 million. I said, well, God, he's lost a lot of money. He doesn't know what he's doing. And so, well, okay. So we started talking, and we bought those for $11 million, which at the time I felt good about. Probably in hindsight, I paid too much because the 09 was not when the recovery started.
No, that was still a pretty tough time. So was this the beginning of Alpha? You and a couple of guys went ahead at that point and put together Alpha Communications. And when you put it together, were you thinking you'd do a couple of one-offs, or were you thinking we'll reboot and we'll do a whole nother big company?
Well, yeah, I decided to try to do it again, and I pulled a lot of my team back together. My chief operating officer, I brought him back. I brought my genius on programming, Scott Mahalik. I brought him back. I hired him away from Intercom, and David Field sued me, which I always thought was ridiculous. I mean, and he won. He won.
Wow.
We paid $1 million to settle it to keep Scott, and I was never one to do that kind of stuff. I just, I'll play hardball, but I don't. If somebody steals somebody from me, it's my fault. It's not their fault. It's
right.
My fault because I didn't keep them. I didn't motivate them. And one of our biggest things we always did is we treated our people. We said people are our most important asset, and it was on the wall. It was it's part of our mission statement. And Fareed came in and saw it in Colorado Springs. I heard the story later. He says, "Get that off the wall. That's ridiculous." And the people were all waiting to have a meeting. They were in the lobby. So he just told his whole staff, "You're not important." And that was the beginning of the end for them.
Guys,
so I started it, and I was planning to go for it, and we got slowed down because my team, me included, we just couldn't get it going. We couldn't bill more than the last year, and I don't know. It was just I didn't have the right team, and I should have known. I mean, one of the things I say in my book is when you make a mistake, fix it as fast as you can, because if you try to rehab these people, if they're not cutting it,
yep,
you probably can't rehab them, and you got to get somebody else. And I'm sure you've experienced that.
Oh yeah, everyone's experienced that one. I mean, any entrepreneur worth their salt that's out there swinging for the fences have experienced that. Well, let's do this. I want to move on to the book, because you've written a book that I'm picked through this thing, looked through this thing. I've got the hard copy coming to me. I think it's going to be delivered out to my ranch today. I'm excited to read it. It's called Do What's Right.
Might not be today. Might not be today, because she just mailed it.
Oh, she did?
Yeah.
Dang, what am I going to do for the weekend? What am I going to do?
I was up early this morning signing books because I was way behind. This is just overpowered me. It's overwhelmed me.
Well, I was so excited. I got the electronic copy last week, and looking through this book, it's not just one of those dry, boring books that was written by a ghostwriter. You wrote this thing. I can feel your heart in this book, and your stories and the way you tell the stories and the wisdom. One, if you're a radio guy or a communications guy, you're going to get a lot out of this book. But if you're a budding entrepreneur, everything you need to know about being an entrepreneur is in this book. It's really amazing. How did you get the idea to write it? You just sit around one day and go, yeah, I think I'll write a book, or do you kind of get pushed into it?
No. I have a friend. His name is Jerry Mullen. He's a a big-time movie producer. He did Schindler's List. He did
Sure.
Jurassic Park 1 and 2. He did Tootsie. He did Rain Man. He's got 45 movies behind him, and he's a good friend. He's about 80 years old, and he calls me right after I got fired. He says, let's go to lunch. And so he and his wife had another couple for lunch. And he said, and my wife, Lynn, was in Hawaii at the time because it was just me. And he listens to my story. They really want to know what happened. How could they do this? This was your company. I said, yeah, it was. It's not anymore. And he said, you got to write a book. I said, Jerry, I'm not writing a book. I don't know how to write a book. I'm tired. I'm angry. And I was so angry I could hardly talk about it. I was so mad at my partners. And because I thought they were just making a wrong turn, big time. And they wanted me to do something. The start of my downfall was they wanted me to do something that I really viewed as very unethical. And I wouldn't do it. And I quit. I resigned. My wife was typing the resignation letter while I was on the phone with one of my partners from Stevens Inc. and Old Strauss. And I said, I'm done. He said, well, you can't quit. I said, why not? He said, you got a contract. I says, well, you may be the brightest guy on the planet, but let me tell you something. There's a guy named Abraham Lincoln. You must not have done history very well, because Abraham Lincoln did away with slavery. So I quit. And he called me back the next day and begged me to stay, agreed to let me make this decision. It was clearly a management decision. It wasn't a board decision. I was trying to change consultants, and I was changing from Stevens Inc.'s subsidiary, Warren Stevens subsidiary. And they were health consultants, but they did nothing for us. They were worthless. And so I found this guy in Atlanta, and I switched to it. And he guaranteed us $1 million savings with no benefit change. And he delivered on it. But from that point on, I was dead. Noel Strauss treated me like a peon. It was horrible. And, I kept griping to my wife, I don't like this anymore. It's no fun.
Yep.
These people they don't know the chain of command. They were going directly to my CFO and telling him to do stuff. And in fact, after I told the CFO we're changing consultants, I said, get it in gear. Here's the guy's name, blah, blah, blah. And I was up at my ranch enjoying myself, and I called Grassi, our CFO, a few days later, and I said, how's it going? And let's switch over to Scott Shannon. He says, we're not doing it. I said, what do you mean? We're not doing it. He said, yeah, Noel said we're going to stay with Stevens. And I just, I got a bad habit. I go crazy sometimes. And I really went crazy with Noel. And he said, well, that's the way it's going to be. And, and I said, well, I'm not doing it. But he capitulated on that. But it was, my deck was stacked against me from that moment forward. And the final deal, we just got in a disagreement. And I said, okay, I was going to say I quit. And Bob Prophet, the guy that's been with me forever, he was my COO at Citadel. He started with me early on in Citadel, running Colorado Springs, and advanced his way up. And he fired me. He wrote me the letter. It was a very unpleasant letter. Only time in my life I've been fired from anything.
Wow.
So it was hard to swallow. And I'll say this book is the best thing for me because it was cathartic to write about it. My first drafts, I'm embarrassed by them. I've got them in storage, but I'm going to burn them up because they were terrible. I was so mean, so angry. And then I worked through it. And, in fact, my minister really helped me because it's like the sermons, he was talking to me.
Yeah.
He was talking about the alpha wolves in one of the scriptures and how they had gone after Stephen in Acts and he'd forgiven them. And suddenly it dawned on me, I got to forgive these people.
Yeah.
I can't go through the rest of my life hating them, and I don't hate them. They're good.
Yeah.
Hey, you know what? Most powerful force in the world is forgiveness. You don't want to have people to have that power over you. Let's talk about the book a little bit. I know we're running long, but I got to tell you, Larry, having this opportunity to have you on is just gold for me. I just love it because you're one of those guys that so many people admire.
When I saw you connect, because I knew who you were, and I go, whoa, this is big time. I called my main advisor on this book, and I said, you won't believe this. Kent Emmons is going to interview me. And I was like, whoa. And then when
Larry, this is how I know you have way too much time on your hands.
Well, I do. I'm down in the basement signing books. Not a good thing. Probably.
Well, let's talk about the book a little bit. In several sections, actually you call it acts, several acts. But, for budding entrepreneurs, let's set the radio side aside for another interview. But for budding entrepreneurs, what's your best advice to them when they're looking for an opportunity? Then we'll talk about operating, then we'll talk about exit. So when somebody is looking for that great opportunity, what's your best advice for them?
I think you make your money on the way in to a great extent. If you don't buy right, you won't be an entrepreneur for long. And, like back to my Honolulu days, I should not have paid $600,000 for this station. Now knowing what I know now, however, we had everything, every bit of wind, headwind hit us, and I made a deal to sell it to these guys from Muskegon, Michigan, and the principal crashed his plane with all of his team aboard the night before they were going to do their inspection, and the deal would have been done. And so I had to start over, and finally sold it to some high flyers from Reno, Nevada that were get rich quick seminar guys, and they took it into the ground, and it ended up I had to chase them in bankruptcy. And I finally got my money, and I made money for my partners and me, but it was hard to do it.
So going in on the buy, you're making that money on the way in. What about somebody who's going to start something from scratch? Because you took your company, you started with that little station in Hawaii. You started from scratch. You didn't start really buying your way into anything big. What about something like that where people are literally starting from scratch?
If you know what you're doing, if you know the industry, that's the way. That's probably the only way you're going to be able to do it, because it's not easy raising money, and what I found out is be very careful who you take money from. That I learned in my whole career. Only twice did I have a bad experience. One was in Alpha, and one was in Citadel, where I took in an investor that was just bad news and put me in a corner for a little while until I figured a way to get back at him and get rid of him. And so, you got to start from scratch. And, I've tried some businesses before that I didn't know anything about. I had a brilliant idea to do I don't even like to talk about it, a timeshare on boats. And, big market, we didn't have any capital, and we made a few bucks, but it was terrible. It was terrible. I really didn't assess the opportunity correctly, and so what it taught me there is, I beat these things to death before I buy them. During the due diligence process, I tie them up on faith. And you know how that is, agreement in principle, but you can get out of that if you don't like what you see.
Right.
And so I would constantly be digging all the time. I mean, I'd take weeks to do the diligence, and we didn't come up with a lot of surprises from our deals. I don't think we ever had a big surprise from any deal. We knew what we were getting into. So that's what you got to do, is do your homework and surround yourself with the best lawyer you can get, the best accountant you can get, and the best people. Once you get your business, you got to be selective in who you hire, and because that's going to make the people are the most important element in everything I've done.
Well, let's talk about that. So going from the beginning, let's talk about the operation. Obviously, it's people that makes it operate. But what are the things that made your businesses operate at its absolute maximum when they were rolling along?
we gave a lot of training. We had every summer we would have 2 or 3 weekends where we'll have big groups of our employees up there, and we'd have motivational speakers. We've had people from the television business speak to us, on-air people. We've had fantastic consultants that we used to use. Nobody uses them anymore because everybody's cutting costs, and then the salespeople. You know, our deal was everybody in the building is a salesman.
Yep.
You may be in programming, you may be the receptionist. In fact, one of the most important salespeople we have is the receptionist. And at Alpha right now, her name is Tricia. She just talks to me a lot, and she's the greatest person because she makes contact with all of our listeners. They come in to get prizes, and
right.
She treats them so great. And you know, she has this special water deal that she does with fruit in it every day. And you know, the people who come in they chat with her, and and she makes sure they get to meet some of the stars. Like we have a guy named Lars Larson in Portland.
Yeah,
fantastic guy. I mean, he's one of the real deals in radio, and those people are disappearing, and that's the problem that radio has. But
yep.
You got to get the right people, and you got to give them inspiration and direction, and then get the hell out of the way, because let them do their thing. And that's what we did. We didn't micromanage, and then it turned out that at the end, my board was micromanaging us. That's saying they don't trust me, and certainly didn't trust Bob Profit, although they kept Bob because he'll do whatever they tell him to do. And but I just had to get out because you at Citadel, my board, it was strict chain of command. It's not something I dictated.
Yep.
It's something they were sensible enough to know. And one of my best board members was a guy who's since passed away, but he was the chairman of a big bank and did a lot of business with us. And he used to, in board meetings, he'd say, guys, if you weren't in the service, you need to listen to something. You need to know the chain of command. And Larry is in command. And if you need something, you go through Larry. You don't go to Joe Blow on the air and tell him you want tickets to Las Vegas. And that's what, as I write in the book, the contrast between the Citadel board and this board in Alpha, that was the difference. These were real businessmen.
Comes down to your personnel, comes down to your board, comes down to your investors, all the way through. That's what's going to make it operate smooth as you're in the middle of operating.
That's right.
Now, when you start to look for that exit, obviously we went through the Citadel exit. When an entrepreneur, whether they've got a chain of restaurants, whether they've got real estate, whatever it may be, at what point do you think people should start looking for that exit? I've always felt like when it's not fun, that's when it's time to start looking. That's
certainly right. If I was in this thing today, which I'm not, I'd be trying to get out as fast as I can, because this COVID-19 is going to be so far-reaching, the impact of it, and I don't even think the government has any assessment of that at all. They don't get it, but I've got tons of friends that are out there trying to keep afloat, and there's still some really good radio guys out there. I mean, I've got a friend in Phoenix that's got stations, Mike Cutchell, very good friend. In fact, he took my place on the Alpha board. I could designate somebody to take my place because I didn't want to be on the board anymore.
Right.
And because they weren't following the law. I mean, they sold $110 million worth of properties without having a board meeting. And any lawyer you talk to or treatise you read says if it's a major decision, you got to have a board approval. And they didn't do it. And so I just said, I got to get out of here because there could be lawsuits. And I'm not optimistic about where it's going, but there's a lot of good operators. I was on a radio show up in Long Island, and they send it into Florida to their stations, and John Caracchiola is a great operator. Paul Stone and he lives in sort of between Georgia and Florida. He's got stations in both places, and he's the salt of the earth. If I ever went into it again, it'd be with him. Yep. Or Caracciolo, or Cutchell in Phoenix. Those guys really get it, and what's happened in radio is the consolidation happened and attracted this money from professional managers, from investors who have professional managers working for them. They just work for them. It's destroyed many of the properties. I mean, iHeartMedia, Cumulus, both been through bankruptcy, maybe headed there again.
Yep.
It's just, they think you can cut costs to get to success. I've always been one, you drive the top line.
Yeah, true. And you know what? When all the consolidation happened, and especially with the guys who really didn't get radio, everything started sounding alike and looking alike, and that was kind of the downfall.
Totally.
Yep.
Totally.
Larry, I hate to say goodbye, but we've been on for a little over an hour and a half. I want to come back again, possibly even in the next week or two, and really do a deep dive into the book. And the book looks amazing. By that time, if it's left to your ranch and is at my ranch, I'll have read the hard copy and have a bunch of notes for you. I'd love to do that if you've got the time.
Well, I would love that, and I'd like it too if I could put in a plug. It's you get the book at LarryWilsonStore.com. Wilson singular.
That's right, LarryWilsonStore.com. It's not on Amazon yet, so it's LarryWilsonStore.com.
No. We decided to do everything homemade in this deal. We're keeping our costs down, and all I want to do is break even, and then I'm going to pay the people that have helped me with this project. I'm going to pay them some money, and then anything else over that is going to go to charity. So I urge people to buy the book. I think I'm getting feedback from a lot of emails saying that they're really enjoying the book. And my editor, she was amazing. She made the book. She was so great. She pushed me so hard. And she just got a copy of the book last night, and she called me and was so excited about it. And it's a fun, I mean, it's my book, but I think it's a fun read. It's not one of those, hey, look at me, ain't I great? Because
there's advice no matter what. And by the way, right now with all this COVID stuff going on, the economy being in shambles, everyone's pretty much going to have to be an entrepreneur. There's not a lot of jobs. We just hit 40% unemployment that was announced yesterday. So this is going to be one of those books that is a real handy thing. Larry, in the next week or two, why don't we plan on doing a deep dive?
Whatever you say.
That sounds good.
I would love to do it, Kent, and anytime, any place.
That sounds good. Larry Wilson, a national treasure. I got to tell you what, I don't care where you are in America, you've heard one of Larry's radio stations. Larry, thank you for being such a great American and a great friend to so many people.
Thank you.
You got it.
Kent.
Larry Wilson.
See you later. Bye-bye.